All right, good evening, everybody. It is that time of the month again. It is Governance Webinar High Impact Series, session number 5. We are focusing on the culture that you desire to see in your organization that you lead. So this is Tom Miller from Leaders Building Leaders, and in partnership with the North Carolina Public Charter School Accelerator Program. So happy to lead this session with you this evening. My partner is with me, Jeff Gorski, and he's going to be controlling our slides this evening. Remember, the leadership program is focused on learning, equipping, advancing, and developing not only yourself, but the individuals that you lead, building a strong succession plan towards the future. And our mission is to be the difference maker in the leadership development of individuals and organizations. So let's go ahead and move forward. It is time to get good, everybody. So this 60 minutes is definitely going to impact your organization in many ways, and it not only impacts your public charter school, but maybe you are in charge of developing policies and procedures in the organization that you lead or work within. So let's get out of distractions. Go ahead and put that cell phone away. Just for the next 60 minutes, because one golden nugget can certainly impact your organization that you lead. So let's get started, Jeff. Our main focus on all of our leadership webinar series for governance is focusing on the board's roles. So every month we really talk about these 6 roles being so critical to overseeing an organization effectively. So we've already hit on many of these pieces, but this evening we're going to really focus on this highlighted red one, establishing and monitoring management compliance with policies designed to maximize legal compliance and ethical behavior. That's what we're really going to focus on this evening, but you'll see other aspects of our roles throughout the presentation. We'll be certainly talking about those. All right, Jeff, go ahead and move forward. So if you remember back in August, I believe we started, we really talked about the formula for greatness for board governance. And number 1, establishing a shared mission and vision. All right, that's where it all comes. That's where the clarity and the purpose of your organization is really, really set. And then secondly, develop relationships of mutual trust and respect. Okay? Boards have to have unity. Okay? No trust, no unity, no progress. And then finally, your outcome is going to be setting clear performance expectations of no surprises. So following this formula, this 3-step formula, establishing a mission, establishing trust, and then setting clear performance expectations are going to make it a lot easier to oversee the organization and getting to what you desire. And then the next session, we had talked about keeping the main thing, and learning how to prioritize your board's discussions and actions. So leading purposeful meetings and really, really focusing on the 20% that matters, because 80% of your outcomes comes from 20% of your focus, all right, 20% of your work. So then the next month, session number 3, we focus on dialogue is not decision making, right? And really, really focusing on that time is our most precious resource, and wasting it is a slow form of suicide. So this is everything. You have to value and respect time. You respect your, developing that mutual respect in your organization is going to get you to where you need to be, and focusing on the right things, as we talked about the session before, keeping the main thing the main thing. The next month, we talked about Ronald Reagan, right? Trust but verify. Having verification processes to ensure that the performance standards that you set are being met. Right? What gets measured gets done. And in December, we focused on where did all the money go, right? We talked about the number 1 reason that public charter schools close is because of finances, okay? It's either poor fiscal management, loss of enrollment, which leads to loss of funding, which usually there's nobody overseeing the budget, and the budget's not adjusted correctly, which leads to, in many cases, bankruptcy. So this month, I want to really focus on creating that culture you desire to see and feel. Okay, so this is session 6, January 28th, 2016. We're going to really be focused on policy development, because it's a critical characteristic of effective charter school governance. So let's get started. I've already talked about why charter schools close. Now, the number one reason is fiscal issues. The number two reason, which makes number one occur, is the lack of internal controls and oversight. And setting policy creates the box that the operation team works in. Okay, so as a board, it's your responsibility to create policy. So let's talk about what our deliverables are for this evening, Jeff. Go ahead and put that slide up. We're going to learn how to write effective policies through a 10-step policy development process. And each of you are going to have the time and the opportunity to begin the process of developing a needed policy in your organization. You could have a board that still hasn't opened your school yet, right? You're still through the ready to open process, preparing to open this fall. Maybe you're in your first couple of years. Maybe you've been around for 10 years. I've seen probably the least amount of policies in schools that have been around the longest, right? It's only been the last couple of years that there's been a heavy focus on policy development through the state. So, and the third deliverable is, just initiate the process of implementing and evaluating the current policies at the charter school that you govern. So we have some resources that we would be able to share to you at your request. That is just a spreadsheet of all the policies that we recommend, and it's a quick internal audit system of what something you could do. All right. So we did email out a template. It's also on our website, that you can utilize, or as you go through this process, and we will make sure that we send the template back out when we send the recording of this session. So let's get started. So one of the roles that we talked about for the board is to develop policies to oversee and manage the school, right? So one of the expectations of the board is to develop and uphold charter school policies which are lawful, fair, and provide protection to all the school's constituents. And so in general, you, the board, write the policy, adopt the policy, and the administrator carries it out, right? They develop the procedures to carry it out. It's really important that boards establish policies for managing school emergencies before they occur. Unfortunately, most policies are written after the emergency, but it's great to be, if you can be responsive rather than reactive, you're going to be in great shape. And then finally, through policy, this is the most important, the board limits what the management of the school is free to do, right? So this is money and assets, okay? How the leadership team makes decisions. So could be any aspect, but money and assets are really, really critical here. So let's keep talking. Let's keep going forward. Let's look at policies versus procedures, because this is very, a lot of people get these confused, right? So when we think about policies, right, policies are board-driven and procedures are management-driven. So policies are a very broad application. They should be written broadly, so the management team has opportunities when things arise to make decisions based upon broad policies, right? But because procedures are very narrow, right? So the policy for admissions is broad in the sense that students eligible have to live in the state of, have a residency in North Carolina, certain age requirements, grade, The procedures of the lottery process are not a policy. They're a very detailed step-by-step process, okay? So it's very important to think about policies, broad, big, procedures, small, the inside. Policies are the guiding principle, where procedures describe in detail the specific procedures and protocols. Policies rarely change. Rarely change. You look in the state board, the policy manual, you'll see policies that are 30, 40 years old. But procedures are prone to change, right? They're tweaked based upon what needs to happen to get to the desired behavior and culture that we're seeking as an organization. And policies are approved by the full board, okay, full board in open session. But procedures don't need to be approved by the board. The procedures are driven by school management. Okay, it's good that the management team may inform the board how they're carrying out the step-by-steps to get, to adhere to the policy, but that's later in our conversation tonight. So let's move forward and let's talk about why we create policies. Most importantly, number one, the board is able to delegate authority but still retain ultimate responsibility and control of the organization. Right? It eliminates micromanagement, which a lot of boards get accused of. Secondly, policies assure the consistency of actions, especially in difficult and stressful situations. Policies minimize redeliberation on matters that the board has already previously decided and discussed. And policies define the methods the school wishes to operate, and the board wishes to govern. Okay? These four are really, really important and a great conversation for you to have during your governance, development sessions. If you spend the last 10 minutes getting better as a board, these are four great statements to talk about why we create policies and whether or not the board is actually doing them. Okay, next slide talks about when do we create new policies? Okay, when do we create new policies? When is it time? I've already kind of discussed this. Issues arise which are not adequately or acceptably addressed by current board procedures. Okay, this is that emergency that we're not prepared for. And as my mentor John Maxwell says, if you're not preparing, you will be repairing. Also, it's time to write a new policy when changes in the operating practices have accumulated over time. So the current policies really don't reflect reality. So this could be many things. This could be maybe you've moved campuses. Maybe you have a larger grade level structure. Maybe you have multiple campuses. There's just some things that could come up over time where your current policies do not necessarily meet your goals. All right, let's keep moving forward. Sorry for the beeping. I'm in a parking lot, coming to you live. So here we go. So we've talked about. So here's a few more aspects. When is it time to create a new policy? Transitions is a big one. So internal transitions and external transitions. So let's talk about internal transitions first. Internal transitions might be changing leadership, changing your building, enrollment numbers, grade levels, services offered. Okay. Your external could be changes in federal or state regulations, equal employment safety provisions, okay, charter school legislation. We've had a lot of changes in charter school law over the last couple of years. There's the allowance of a weighted lottery process now in North Carolina. This may change the way you do your admissions policy, right? So a change in the law could, benefit or change how you're going to do your admissions. One more slide about when it's time to create a new policy is that, again, the current policy does not adequately reduce ambiguity and ensure the uniformity of decisions across the charter school. So this is, again, going to multiple campuses. You could have, and in a sense, you've got the Franklin Academy has 3 campuses. They have a high school, they've got a K-3 and a 4-8 campus. Their policies might be different based upon where they are, where they're located, grade level served. Okay, maybe the building makes certain policies come into effect. All right. So let's move forward and talk about what effective policies are. Effective policies are, 1, mission and value oriented. 2, product driven. Okay, product driven, not process. The product. What is the end result? Okay, begin with the end in mind when you're writing policies. They're legal and do not deny constitutional rights. Effective policies are communicated to all stakeholders. They evolve over time. They're written with the scope of the full board's authority, adopted properly, and ethical. All right, these are what effective policies are. The next visual talks about who can initiate policy development or amendments to a policy. And the answer is anybody, honestly. You know, it could be students, committees, board members, school leaders, staff, parents, and stakeholders. I mean, anybody. Anybody who sees a need, identifies something, right? Don't, you know, when you see something that you know is not creating a safe environment, creating a productive environment, creating the environment that you desire to see, the culture you desire to see, the culture you desire to feel, it's time to look at your policies. And your policies, I'll probably say this 2 or 3 times, your policies should be reviewed at least once per year. Once per year, if not more often. Okay, because policies are going to need to be changed and read so they stay in the forefront so you're making consistent decisions. And sometimes when we don't look at our policies over time, they create a problem, which one of our stakeholders is going to call us out on. Very important, right? When your actions change, make sure that everything is in alignment, because you will have that parent or two that's really good about finding your policy manual and reading and digging through there to find the one thing that you did incorrectly. So very, very important. All right, great work. Let's talk about the hierarchy of policy authority. The hierarchy of policy authority. So at the very, very top, nothing is more important than federal and state laws. You cannot write a policy to contradict federal or state policy. You could write a policy that's more strict, but you cannot write the opposite, juxtaposition. The next would be your charter agreement. It's very important to read your charter agreement. It's a huge document and has really evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. And what I was told by the Office of Charter Schools is that anything that's in the current charter agreement is in effect to the agreement that you may have signed 6 years ago. But that would be between you and the authorizer to have that conversation. It's definitely important to take time to read your charter agreement each year, and every board member should have an understanding of what they'd be held accountable to. The next is your bylaws. Okay, your bylaws have the next level of authority. They tell the board how to operate. Right? You wrote it. You need to abide by it. Next is standing policies of the public charter school. These are the policies that the board adopted. And the next would be administrative decisions. Okay. It's a nice chart hierarchy to take a look at where do we go. Now, something that's very important here that I want to make sure I point out is that as a school, as a public charter school, you have to follow all public school laws. But there are specific laws that are for school systems and school districts. You'll find it if you have, I would get a copy of the public school law book, the North Carolina version, obviously. And what I find sometimes amusing is that charter school principals or boards will take out this public school law book and they will hold, I'm sure I did this, hold someone accountable, a student accountable, or a parent accountable of what's according to this, what's in this public school law book. However, they don't follow all the laws, right? So if you don't have it written in your policy manual, or that you're following all North Carolina public school laws, You can't just pick and choose which ones you're going to use, right? So it's important to be consistent with your decision making. And that public school law book is great. It can definitely help you make decisions, but you can't say, I'm going to follow that law based on discipline, but I'm not going to follow this other law because I'm a charter school and I can do what I want. Right? So that's just important to kind of have that discussion, what laws we're going to follow. And I should have said this earlier. If you have any questions, go ahead and use your chat box, and I'm going to ask Jeff to chime in here in a second when he's got anything else to add, because he did a really good session. We went to a staff development on policy development. So as we move into this policy development side here, Jeff, you go ahead and chime in when you're ready. So how the policy is developed, number one, obviously a need is identified. All right, you identify a need, and I've already talked about what this could happen. This could be a stakeholder, it could be anybody comes in, sees something they don't like, complaints, whatever. It could be a grievance, something. So the one thing you do is you look at what previous policies you have in place and examine to see if you already have this addressed somewhere, or if another policy can kind of cover this issue. And you take the time, you collect some data. You look at what are other charter schools doing, maybe what's your local school system doing, right? Because there's some aspects that charter schools have to mirror the local school system in regards to criminal background checks. Okay, regional, national. You bring in as much information as you can to make the best decision in writing a new policy. You gather recommendations, from several groups. So I would seek the opinions of those that the policy is going to directly affect. Right. So those are staff, student, parents. How do you do that? You could send surveys out, and you could call some of your most local parents, talk about it at a staff meeting. Jeff does a great job of creating these Google Form surveys. So we'll if we draft a policy and help a school out, we'll actually draft it into the Google Form, send it to the whole staff or the parents, and we'll give a week for them to kind of give feedback and ask some questions about the policy. You want to get feedback in constantly because stakeholders are really important, and you want them to feel important, that they're part of the decision-making process. So step 4 would be the recommendations are debated by the board or the signing committee. So this could be your governance committee and decide the framework of the eventual policy. So here's a call to action. Something you can do with your board or your governance is really sit down and say, let's really identify a need at your charter school. You identify a need at your charter school. So I want you to think about your school right now. What's something that's happening? What's something that keeps on coming up at board meetings? Something that you've talked about a lot and you really don't have a good answer for? When you've got that idea, you think about, and this is where your policy template is going to help you, why is the policy needed? What are some of the reasons? So, for example, one issue that could be occurring is lateness, student tardies. Student tardies are happening on a daily basis. Let's say 10% of the student population is tardy every day. Seems to be a big, clump, when you collected all your data, like you really figured it out. Why is it needed? Obviously, not just to have a rule, but education is critical, right? So being on time is critical. And when kids are late and things are running late, it just really sets the whole school off in a bad way. So are there any possible constraints, existing laws or policies with the precedent? So you can ask what other schools are doing. The school I'm thinking about is in an urban area. You can ask other schools. Do you guys have a problem with your tardies? We have a tardy policy, but doesn't really just see it have any impact. Right. I've already talked about some of the data you would collect. So these are just the very basics of starting, right? You have that conversation, you put someone in charge of it, you give that committee or that standing committee a purpose. Maybe you've got that very attentive parent, right? And you could say, you've talked about this 2 or 3 times. Would you like to lead a ad hoc committee in reviewing the policy that you don't like or whatever it may be? So Or maybe it's a teacher, right, who has a really huge issue with their kids being late every day and looking at the policy, it's not working, right? So really, really important to have those inner conversations when you're looking at those first 4 steps. So let's look at step 5. All right, let's look at step 5. So any recommendations, right, for the drafted policy are debated by the board to decide the framework for the eventual policy, right? What is it that we're trying to get to? What's this framework going to be of this policy? What is it that the board is trying to get to? Right? What is it trying to get to? What's the purpose it's trying to get to? What's the framework? Is this going to be a heavy policy regarding discipline? Like, it's got a lot of teeth. It's pretty much a no nonsense, straightforward framework. Is it going to leave it open for local leadership to make decisions? Okay, think about that framework. Number 6, draft of policies created by the team, by the committee that follows a standard format. Okay, so your policy should always be in a standard format. And I've already talked about focusing on the outcomes, establishing boundaries within which staff will operate, and sensitive issues should be reviewed by your legal counsel, right? And most boards have an attorney, but I would make sure you use an outside. Excuse me. I would make sure that you use an outside legal counsel to review, especially those really, really sticky policies, right? So this is where you're really starting to get to the meat of it. All right. So let's move to the next slide where you have an opportunity to talk about the key points, right? So you started the draft, you had that debate, you brought in data. While you're drafting it, what are the key points that are going to be covered in this policy? So if we go back to our tardy policy, what are some of the key points that we may talk about? All right. You don't want to be so rigid that you say exactly what time school will start. Right, but you definitely have to have that in there somehow, right? Not at the exact time, but just the point about students arrive and prepared for school at the start, right? So in your handbook, in your annual procedures, your leadership team would actually dictate what time the school starts. That's one piece. Okay, what does it mean to be tardy? Other topics that if you're looking at a tardy policy. Maybe part of the tardy policy talks about the actual consequence, right? And when we're thinking about that, is this a shall or a may? So maybe your tardy policy results in discipline regarding student grades. If I teach math, and I've got a kid that was tardy 37 times to math class, first period, I'm going to assume they're going to miss a lot of education. Right? So you definitely want to have some part in there about what is going to be the discipline process, right? What is going to be what may happen as a result of the policy infraction. So we've already talked about, the key topics is kind of, the culture we desire to see is kids show up on time, right? Kids show up on time, they're prepared, and everybody respects the time that school starts. Another key topic would be, what's the actual outcome? What's the actual, consequence for this? Another key topic that needs to be discussed is the why, right? We go back to the purpose. Remember I talked about they should be mission and value oriented. So where's the core values here? Right? If you don't offer transportation as a school, or don't do your diligence to help carpooling or find other ways to get kids on time, it's always going to be an issue, right? It's always going to be an excuse for the people that show up late. All right, so it's just important to talk about what are the key points and what's the board's position on it, right? So this is just an opportunity to really take a look as you're drafting. And these, when you talk about the board's position, it could be talked about by the full board. It could just be talked about by the governance committee. This could be a part where you're bringing in the stakeholder input, right? But it's just important to, when you're looking at key topics, what is going to be the position moving forward? All right. So after you finish that step and you got your topics, you got your pieces, you've had some heavy conversation. There should be a notice provided to the public where the first comments might be made. Now, do you have to do this for every policy? No, but really important policies like what the parents care about, uniform, grading. Those are two really big ones. You guys might think of some more, but sometimes what we think parents and stakeholders will be most curious about, they're not. And then the ones that are the little issues, are the ones that they come in a I know lots of boards have had uniform policy conversations. It's been their biggest crowd of the year, right? So maybe you're talking about technology in the classroom or the use of cell phones or cell phones on campus, uniform. We've already talked about. So you just want to make sure that you notice ones that stakeholders are going to be very, very talking about. You give them an opportunity for public comment. Now, it could also be the feedback you get could also be from your survey as well, right? So based on any comments or feedbacks, revisions could be made, right? So this is, if you look at a state board example, they do discussion on first read, and the next month they come back for action. Sometimes they have action on first read, but 99% of the time they're going to have discussion, give a stakeholder opportunity, all the members of the State Board of Education to get their feedback, really dig their teeth, talk to their constituents, and then come back and vote. So then the next step would be, after that, if there's any changes, notices provided for the second reading where the policy would actually be adopted. You hope it's adopted, right? You hope the vote goes forward. The new policy is printed and provided to each member of the board and administration team to keep in the policy manual. Right. So it's really important, as you went through that you gave your policy some teeth, right? So that was, you sought out expert advice. You made sure that your staff and stakeholders got involved. And you really asked the question: what additional resources could we use as we're going through this process? So when you're looking at steps 6, 7, and 8, this is where you really want to make sure that you've got some teeth and you've done your homework. And it's a great communication when the board is adopting the policy, especially if it's something difficult for the stakeholders. There's an understanding, and you demonstrate this. So there's 2 more steps of how the policy is actually developed. The policy is implemented, right? So the implementation procedures are developed by the administration. So this is when, all right, the board hands it over to the principal, and now the principal trains the staff, carries it out, informs the stakeholders, and implements and adheres. And then the policy should be evaluated and, if needed, revised. If it's not, resulting in the behaviors that we that we thought we would see, then it may need to be revised. And so I always recommend that this is about the time of the year where policy should be looked at, because if you're changing policy for the upcoming school year, it takes 3 to 4 months to get review, revisions, first reads, and action, so you can print it and get it ready for the next school year. Okay, so this is about the time of the year where February and March is when the policies should be reviewed. So I'll pause for a few minutes. If there's any questions, go ahead, Jeff, and let me know if we got anything, or Jeff, if there's anything I missed with the development process there.
No questions popping up yet, but one thing I just want to add, my reflection about policy that I keep in the front of my mind at this point in time was given to me by a lawyer who said, the old vision of writing policy was that it had to sound like it was written by a lawyer, right? That it was very official, heretofore, henceforth, official sounding words, unnatural sentences. But, the kind of policy that we're writing as charter school leaders or as charter school boards is meant for consumption. It is written especially to be usable by the general public, by the parents of our students. And so, writing your policies in common language, in simple form, not mincing words, not using more words than you need to say something that's very simple, is our best way of going about writing policy. Because again, the goal is that our stakeholders, whether it's our teachers or our school leader or our parents, even our students, that they can pick up our policies and understand what they mean, that there's no confusion, that there's nothing put in there that stands in the way of them fully understanding and being able to abide by the policies that we write. So really important to remember that.
Yeah, great solid points. That is true. Sometimes I read policies and I'm like, well, what were they trying to get at, right? So, and then part two of that, Jeff, is writing policies in a positive way, as well, right? Because you think about most policies talk about the things that staff can't do, right? Employees are not allowed to do, or students are not allowed to do. It's important to be in a framework of here's a policy regarding what we want to see, and not be so negative. But unfortunately, most current policy manuals tend to be just like you said, written by lawyers, lots of words, and usually on a negative aspect. Great job. Well, let's look at the next slide, the core elements of an effective policy. So I just want to show you a couple of examples. There should be the name of the title of the policy up top. This is just a clear, streamlined framework. You just want everything to be, formatted and consistent. Adoption or the approval date, really important, to have at the bottom, when was this actually adopted, when was it revised. The date it becomes effective, right? So sometimes, you may adopt a policy now in January, but it's not going to come into play until the next school year, right? Especially if you're doing something with, changes to like an employee's payroll scale or schedule. It's hard to change mid-year because there's a lot of unintended consequences. Where will the policies be kept? Okay, so handbooks, websites, a common numbering system, who actually approved the policy. Okay, so you could have a signature there, and who does the policy affect? So let's take a look at what some of these look like. Let's move down to our examples. So this is policy TCSU 03. This is the policy on public charter school student admissions, and this is straight from the North Carolina Public Charter School policy manual, which is in the state board policy manual, which is not easy to find, by the way. But this is one of the policies here, TCSU 003, and you'll see they got the policy location, so that's under 21st century systems, when it was adopted, when it became effective, any revisions, what are the statutory references, right, if they're using those pieces. And the policy is that all charter schools shall have open admission procedures and policies. Open enrollment for a charter school must allow the mission statement, target population, and State Board of Education approved application. Admission period shall be, shall's the key word, be no less than 30 consecutive calendar days. If there's more applicants or applications than seats available, the charter school shall determine a date, time, and location to hold the legally required lottery. This lottery must be publicly noticed and open for public observation. Few key words there, okay? This is pretty broadly written, clean, maybe a little wordy, but the shall are the key, right? So shall or you have is a have to do it, and a may is it's your option to do it. Okay? Shall is you have to do it. But the key that I see is that It shall be no less than 30 consecutive calendar days. And when you think about that, why is there a policy that specifically says 30 consecutive calendar days? Why would you think? Remember, I've already said, I kind of foreshadowed, policies are typically written after the emergency occurs. Well, we actually had a charter school a few years ago, prior to this policy date of 2013. So it was the spring of 2013, which had open lottery dates on 2 Saturdays. Right, there was only two Saturdays they kept the open enrollment opportunities open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on 2 consecutive Saturdays. And it actually happened to be a private school conversion into a charter school. So, oddly enough, who do you think were the majority of the people who applied to that charter school? Well, the same people that were at the private school, right? So this is why the state board adopted a policy making sure mandatory and changing. So if you go back to the previous policy, it was definitely different. So let's look at the next slide of what board should establish policies for, and that's all major components of operations. So you got your governance, right? So some key policies under governance are your conflict of interest. This is a state law. You have to have a conflict of interest policy. Your school leader evaluation and your grievances. Okay, your finance should be who has access to funds, who can spend funds, how much money can they spend without board approval or a second signature. The education aspect might be your policy for academic calendar, like how long is a school day or how many days of the school year. There's a state law, 185 days or 1,025 instructional hours, but you as a local entity could establish your own. Remember, that can be more strict but not less than state law. And then policies for facilities and operation. So here's this next slide shows some recommended basic policies for internal. All right, so you got a list of personnel and a list of operational pieces. I underline ones that are critical, that can get you in trouble regarding the law and your performance framework. So that's your certification and licensure. So you have to have 50% of your teachers currently licensed and actually teaching what they're licensed to teach in North Carolina. Nepotism, you have to have a nepotism policy, and I just actually that just got changed a little bit in House Bill 334. Got to have a grievance policy. Operation-wise, you have to have an admissions policy, and there's another grievance. So you got a grievance employee, but you also have grievance for students and parents. So here's a list. Go ahead and reach out to us, and we've got some other formal lists. The next slide talks about here's charter school policies under the 21st Century series, right? So you can go to the State Board Policy Manual, go to the 21st Century, and you can pull that. I believe there's 19 policies right now. But these are some of them: licensure, conflict of interest, accountability, the open enrollment period, which we talked about, student enrollment, which is now increased to a minimum of 80 students by law. What insurances you have to have is in your charter agreement. Criminal background checks have to mirror the LEA. Health and safety. So as a public school, you have to follow all health and safety laws of public schools. Very important. Exceptional children, you have to follow the federal laws under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay. There's an academic piece about what the charter schools have to do. If they do not meet 60% proficiency or growth 2 out of 3 years, they shall. Well, they may be closed. Actually, the law just changed, right? So they may be closed. You should have policies regarding finances, and the big key is making sure that you get your audit in on time, October 31st each year. Open meetings law, you can go and find that Article 33, and your open meetings law is actually in your charter agreement. So that's why it's important to read the charter agreement to know what you have to follow. And last one. You should have a policy regarding maintaining your charter and your charter agreements. That's basically carrying out what your charter says you would do, your charter application. So Jeff, I don't know if I missed any there, but feel free to hop in if I did. So looking at the next slide, so here's just a little homework for you as you're going through. Take a look at this policy. Would you consider this policy an effective policy, knowing what we've learned over this first 45 minutes? So this policy title is Student Suspension and Expulsion. Okay, it was adopted January 1st, 2014. The statutory reference would be IDEA, that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And here's the policy written by the school. Students with disabilities can be suspended up to 15 days for violating student conduct policies prior to the hearings. So think about this. Is this policy legal? Is it ethical? Student driven? Go ahead and put your answer up there in the chat box if it's any of those three. Remember, we talked about mission and value oriented, legal, and ethical. All right, good. So the main issue here with the legality of this policy is that the law is 10. The federal law is 10. Students with disabilities can be suspended only up to 10 days for violating student conduct policies prior to hearings. And there's whole other aspects when you get to the 10th day. It's manifestation, determination, processes, and all these other aspects have to occur. So you want to make sure that when you're reading through your policies, this was an actual policy that was in a charter school handbook. When it was approved by the State Board of Education, it had this in there, and we had caught it in the Office of Charter Schools after, and actually it was still there this year. I had noticed that the school never did change their handbook. It's still there. So let's take a look at this one. Is this an effective policy? Let's look at the second policy, Jeff. So this one's testing code of ethics. All right. This is from the State Board piece, the National Public Schools Testing Workbook. So the policy is 1.0. All employees of the Ethical Academy will attend the required trainings and follow all North Carolina Testing Code of Ethics. All right. And the policy 1.1, failure to follow all North Carolina Testing Code of Ethics policies shall result in employee contract violation. This violation may result in contract termination. Going back to our pieces, is this legal? Is it ethical? Is it student-driven? I believe it's all three. It meets the letter of the law. It's ethical because the only thing you have left when you leave this earth is your integrity, right? And this is all about not making bad decisions regarding testing, student testing. And it's definitely student-driven because it's protecting the students. We've had, unfortunately, many issues in our nation. There was just a situation a few years ago with a superintendent in Atlanta who had one of the school districts in Atlanta. She received many accolades, signing bonuses. She was on Oprah for the achievement of schools in this district. And it turns out they found out years later that she was getting a certain group of the staff to change the students' answers on their end of the year tests. You know, she received all these accolades for turning around a district. And actually, there's a link here to the news video about it. And the worst part about that, obviously, all the news was on her about her unethical behavior and how she was able to coerce and force, people to do that. But the kids who thought that they were at grade level, the kids that were showing that they were passing tests on an annual basis, they weren't, right? They weren't. Very, very sad. So it's really important why boards need to understand all the parameters of what you're responsible for as an organization. And testing is a big piece of that. The conversation always goes where, we teach the test and there's all this hoopla in the media about it. But, honestly, when it comes down to it, kids need to be in the forefront. And ethical behavior is always a challenge. It could be challenging for, certain aspects that feel under pressure. And this is a really sad case. You can check that story out. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but these are I believe effectively written policies. So the next slide, it's really important that you communicate your policies to all of your stakeholders. Right? So let's look at some examples. So the policy manuals should be kept in your office or the public area and accessible to the public. Maybe you've got them on your website. Definitely have them in your handbooks. Okay. But it's really important to have all your policies in one place. I see a lot of schools that say their handbook is their policy manual. It's always difficult because the handbook it's usually got procedures and really distinct rules. You can definitely reference policies in your handbook. And there's certainly more as a leader. Once a policy is adopted and the procedure document has been written and reviewed, approved, published, and distributed, now you've got to communicate and train, right? You can't just, we're all guilty of just handing over or purging a giant document to our staff and, just here, read this, right? And it's here's your orientation. Here's a giant employee handbook manual, all the rules you got to follow. It's really important to be value-oriented when it comes to your training and communication. Okay, work on improvements for the next revision. You're asking for clarifying questions and constantly analyzing and reflecting on what works and what doesn't. Definitely update the document, publish and revise. You could have a, like what they do with any books, first edition, second edition, third edition, however many times that you've formatted and changed your handbook over time, there always should be some sort of, timeline and tracking of when it was. Because if you hold someone accountable for a policy that it's not clear when it was adopted, you could certainly be seeing yourself in additional lawsuits under the Office of Civil Rights. So how do we communicate policies and procedures? All right. Communication is the key to everything. It's the key to being successful in any aspect of your life, right? And it's a quick way to really understand if people understand the why behind the policy, right? So communication should not be occurring through memos and emails and blasts. There should be opportunities for communication. And a lot of this you've already should have done on the forefront, remember, because you're collecting data and you're giving opportunity. Right, so there's lots of ways to get it out, and I like the triangulation, right? So one is a face-to-face meeting. Two is your memo or your shot out through an email. But another piece is having it hung on the bulletin board somewhere where the teachers are normally hanging out. So the key is to provide in multiple ways to give the reader added ways to understand the material, right? It's a 16-to-1 ratio. You have to be continually talking about the culture you desire to see and why we do it before other people start to really understand it. So after the communication is the training, because nothing's going to happen without effective training. So some training methods might be lectures, workshops, or seminars at departments or staff meetings. Could be on-the-job training, right? You're working alongside. Could be videos. We've all watched those bloodborne pathogen videos and all those other aspects. I mean, there's ways to get the information out there, but it's about being consistent, right, and clarifying and following up and holding people accountable. A memo in your mailbox is not training. Okay? A memo in the mailbox is not training. So some techniques to ensure success. Okay? Techniques to ensure success. The board commitment to write the policies and procedures. Principals should not be writing policies, right? But the board has to commit that your school will have policies and the procedures that go through with those. All right. You got to walk the talk from all levels of school leadership. You can't write a policy regarding staff being on time and you show up late every other day. You can't have. I remember when I was a principal, we had uniform policy, a very rigid uniform policy for our students, and one part of it was wearing sweatshirts and hooded coats and things like that in class. Yet multiple teachers were always wearing sweatshirts and coats and hooded stuff, but they were making the kids take those off. If we're asking the kids to dress warmer and stay in our uniform colors, then we as a staff had to as well. Employee training offered in a variety of ways, ensuring legal review of all the policies, okay, maybe get a third-party auditing process, and include a policy and procedure understanding as a section on an employee's evaluation. Okay, critical aspect, close that accountability loop. So let's look at our deliverables in review as we finish up. We've learned that writing policies is not as simple as borrowing content, adding a logo, and calling it your own. Okay, it should be mission, value-driven from your own organization. Jeff had some great aspects in there talking about using common language, not technical legal jargon. Nobody wants to see that. As a writer of policy, okay, you are really responsible for researching, reviewing, getting it published, making sure it's clear, getting stakeholder feedback, and having a consistent format, okay, consistent formats and consistent process for reviewing and evaluation. And most importantly, it's not the writer's, the job's not done when the document is finished. Yeah, that's really just when everything has started. That's when the writer turns into the really trainer and communicator and aspect of it, because they have the strongest understanding. So it's important that whoever is responsible for policy development in your organization is also a big part of depending on the implementation aspect, but at least the training and the understanding and the communication part. So, policies. Critical, remember, creates the box that your operation team works in. Right? Should be broad, commonly used language focused on the core values and the overall culture that you desire to see. That is my teaching for this evening, our session number 6. I hope it added value to you, and I hope you learned a great deal. I look forward to talking to you again next month as we tackle another critical element to high effective governance practices. Be safe, everybody.